Welcome to Unload and Show Clear, the podcast about all things IDPA. And now, here's your host, a man for whom getting stuck in traffic was the only thing worse than sticking around for day one of nationals, Lloyd Bailey.
Welcome to the show. Welcome to episode number 3 of the Unload and Show Clear podcast, the show about everything IDPA. Today we continue our intro to IDPA with a review of matches, divisions, and classifications. We're trying to get the rules and all of the things that you need to know to get started boiled down and conveyed to you in a very simple way so that you can get out there, understand the sport, and start enjoying it. So we're talking today about the divisions, the matches that you may compete in, the divisions that you may compete in, and classifications. How do you get a classification? First, let's touch on how matches are defined. Your small local club matches, they're what's called Tier 1 matches. That doesn't mean that Tier 1 special ops guys are going to be there shooting them. It means, well, matches are defined by tiers based on the size of the match. So Tier 1 is your weekly or your monthly club match. Tier 2 are matches that are larger. Everything bigger than Tier 1 is a sanctioned quote-unquote match. You heard me mention this word in a previous episode. This means that the match has been approved by the IDPA HQ, and as such, they have to meet certain standards. The stages have to be approved, a certain number of points are awarded to competitors, and those points will count towards your qualification for the national championship. A certain number of awards have to be given. Your participation has to be reported to HQ, and it will count towards maintaining your classifications. And depending on how you do, you may get what's called a match bump, and that is a change of classification based on your performance. So we'll talk more about classifications in a moment. The difference between Tier 1 and Tier 2 through Tier 4 is sort of like your local golf club. We're going to get back to the golf analogy again in this episode. It's sort of like your local golf club hosting a tournament versus a stop on the PGA Tour. Tier 5 events, the top events, are nationals and worlds. Think of those like, I don't know, the US Open or the British Open. At different tiers, there are different requirements for things like equipment checks, certain kinds of stages like standard stages. There are limits on the numbers of participants. So your scores for these sanctioned matches are going to be reported to the IDP HQ in Perryville, Arkansas, and they will appear on your profile at idpa.com. So how do you get this profile? How do you participate? Well, first of all, you've got to be an IDPA member in good standing, and you've got to have a classification in one of the divisions that are allowed at that match. For a local Tier 1 match, for your club matches, you can go out and start shooting today. You don't have to have a classification. You just have to identify what division you're in. You can go out and start shooting, but you can't do that for long. You need to have a membership, and you need to get a classification. As of the recording of this show, under the 2017 rulebook, there are 6 main divisions. There are also a couple of specialty divisions that we will mention, but we really won't cover in detail. Actually, one of the 6 main divisions we're not going to cover in great detail today. So in total, there are 8 divisions. The ones you will see most commonly are Stock Service Pistol, SSP, Enhanced Service Pistol, ESP, Custom Defensive Pistol, CDP, Compact Carry Pistol, CCP, and Revolver. Now, those 5 divisions are required at all matches from Tier 1 to Tier 5. Some others are optional. The 6th one that I talked about a moment ago, Backup Gun or Bug, is required for local Tier 1 matches, but is optional for sanctioned matches. The other 2 divisions are what's called, commonly referred to as specialty divisions. They were recently added to sort of try out and see how they go. These are the Pistol Caliber Carbine Division, that is PCC, and Carry Optics. And these may be available at other matches, at the Tier 1 or higher levels. It's just up to the match director to decide whether to include them. Today, we're not going to focus on bug or the specialty divisions because they're just not very common. We're going to focus on the most common divisions because that's where you're going to start. The most common divisions at any match, of course, are stock service pistol and enhanced service pistol. These are common entry points for most shooters. Will start in one of these two divisions. Stock service pistols are semi-automatic, striker fired, double action or double action only, using 9mm or larger calibers. In general, these are guns like Glocks, Smith & Wesson M&P, things like this. These guns are, generally speaking, these are stock out-of-the-box guns. You can make some minor modifications to them, things like changing out your grip panels or changing sights or some interior sort of accuracy adjustments, but you can't make major changes to those guns. Next, you have enhanced service pistol. Now, as the name implies, these guns can be enhanced.
Thanks, Captain Obvious.
So, for example, the same guns that are legal in SSP are also legal in ESP. But you can add some things like mag wells or extended magazine releases and things like this to speed things up. You can stipple the grips, you can add non-factory parts to these guns and still be legal. As I said, any gun that's legal in SSP is automatically legal in ESP. So you could take a Glock 17 or a Glock 34 and you could shoot one match in SSP. You could then put on a removable mag well and shoot the next week in ESP with the exact same gun. Take the mag well back off, and then shoot SSP again. Same gun, 3 different matches, 2 different divisions. So you could do that if you wanted to. Most people dedicate a gun to each division if they shoot more than one. ESP guns, though, are not legal in SSP. You can't go down. Single action guns like 1911s are permitted in ESP, but not in SSP. So you'll often see lots of 9mm 1911s in the ESP division. You'll see CZ75s and other variants in the ESP division as well. The next two divisions are really kind of limited capacity divisions, where SSP and ESP, their standard capacities are 10 rounds. The Cdp and Ccp divisions are 8. Why is this? Well, it's based on the size of the firearm. The CDP, or Custom Defensive Pistol Division, is limited to 45 caliber semi-auto pistols. So this division was originally created based on 1911s. Your 1911 in 45 caliber, before the advent or the growth in popularity of some of the plastic fantastic striker fired guns like the Glock 21 or the M&P 45 or the XD 45, because standard magazine capacity for the single stack 1911s was 8 rounds. Any gun that is eligible for this division has to be limited to 8 to maintain sort of an even playing field. So if you want to play with your 13-round Glock 21 or the newer Glock 41, you have to download your magazines to 8 rounds in order to compete in CDP. Now, CCP is the newest of the pistol divisions that is in regular use, and it's based on handguns designed specifically for concealed carry. So guns in this division have to be no larger than the Glock 19. That's the gun that the division was really based on. Capacity is limited to 8 rounds, which is kind of weird. It's half the capacity of a Glock 19 standard magazine, which is 15 rounds, but it's 2 more than the standard capacity of most of the very popular single stack, really thin, concealable striker-fired carry guns like the M&P Shield or the Glock 43. So to use those guns, you actually have to use extended magazines. So it's a little bit strange. If you're using a Glock 19, you have to download to 8. If you're using one of the single stack 9mm or compacts or even the 45 compacts, you have to you probably have to use a magazine extension. The big challenge, one of the biggest challenges, aside from the size of the CCP guns, One of the big challenges in Cdp and Ccp is getting used to the difference in capacity. So if you are used to shooting with a 10-round magazine in SSP or ESP, for example, you have to get used to and plan for reloads that happen quicker because you only have 8 rounds in the magazine. So that's a challenge. Now, within each of those divisions, you have 8 classes based on your skill. We mentioned last week that your classification along with your division determines who you compete against in a match and who your scores are compared to. You don't compete against somebody with greater skill, and if you're a really good shooter, you're not going to be competing against the newcomers. You're going to be competing against people who have similar equipment and similar skill. So how do you get this classification thing? Well, when you first get started, like I said, you don't need a classification right away. You can go to your local club match and you can compete and you can sign up as unclassified. But if you want to compete in sanctioned matches, the state, regional, or national matches, or if you want to continue to participate at your local club level, then you're going to need 2 things. Like I said, an IDPA membership and a classification. IDPA membership is $40 a year. You just go to idpa.com, click on Become a Member, and then click Explore Memberships to sign up. Once you're a member, you got to shoot a classifier at least once every 12 months. Now, there are 7 classifications based on your skill. The lowest level, which I just mentioned, is really not a classification. It's unclassified. Next above that, the first real classification based on the results of a classification match is novice. Above that is marksman, and then sharpshooter, and then expert, and then master. And then at the very top, the elite of the elite shooters in our sport is distinguished master.
The circle is now complete. When I left you, I was but the learner. Now I am the master.
Now, you can classify in multiple divisions if you want to. You're not limited to a single division. You can classify in revolver and the semi-automatic divisions and pistol caliber carbine if you want to. But it'll require you to shoot a classifier for each of those divisions. Now, if you classify in any of the semi-automatic divisions, the CCP, CDP, SSP, or ESP divisions, that classification applies to all of the others thanks to something called Universal Semi-Automatic Classification. You don't have to remember that, but basically what that means is you go out and classify with any semi-automatic in any of the semi-automatic divisions, and that classification will then apply to all of the others. It won't apply to revolver. It won't apply to PCC. It won't apply to carry optics. It won't apply to bug. But you can get classified in all the other divisions. Just go out and shoot a classifier in CCP or SSP, and you'll have all 4 of the semi-automatic classifications. So how do you get one of these classifications? Well, initially there's just one way, and that is to shoot a classifier at your local club. IDPA clubs are required to offer a classifier match at least once a year. So contact your local club and see when they are going to be holding another one. Sometimes, if enough people are asking, they may go ahead and schedule one, especially if there's a major match coming up. Back in 2013, when I wanted to shoot the North Carolina State match in August of that year, the club that was hosting the match put on a last-minute classifier for those who needed one. In 2015, before a major match here in Texas, I contacted a club out in East Texas and asked if they were going to be doing a classifier because my local club was not, and they decided they had enough interest to schedule one. So what is a classifier match? Basically, it's a test of your skill. It's a series of shooting challenges or strings which are scored like a stage, like we talked about last week, where your score is your final time plus points plus penalties. That final score is then compared to a scale based on your division to determine your classification. Go to idpa.com and click on Rules of the Sport and then view the rules, and you'll see the classification score charts, and you'll see what I'm talking about. I'll include a link to all this in the show notes as well. Now, there are two methods of classifications for handgun divisions. There's a standard method, and then there's an abbreviated method, and we'll explain both in this show. The standard method is used with the standard classifier match, which has been used for years in the sport. It's been modified a number of times, and we'll talk about it in just a second. The abbreviated method is new. Bill Wilson, one of the founders of the sport and the CEO of Wilson Combat, developed something called the 5x5 drill years ago, and IDPA now has adopted that drill as an abbreviated classifier. Why would they do this? Well, the standard classifier is complicated and it's time-consuming. It involves multiple strings, multiple shooting positions, multiple targets. It involves movement, reloads, shooting around cover. It's 72 rounds. It used to be 90. And you have to change targets several times, and it can take all day to complete a classifier match, depending on the number of shooters who sign up and the amount of space available and how much help the club has in running it. This is why clubs don't put these classifiers on very often. The abbreviated 5x5 classifier can be added to a local match as a stage. It's just 25 rounds. One target, stand and deliver, no movement, no weak hand shooting, one reload instead of 4, no shooting from behind cover. It's really straightforward, and you can run through it in a couple of minutes. Now, once you've got the classification, you can maintain that classification. The second way to get a classification is to maintain it by shooting a sanctioned match or by shooting your annual classifier. That's the other way that you keep it up. You don't necessarily have to do both. You don't have to shoot a sanctioned match and a classifier. Once you've got your classification, go out and shoot at least one classification match or shoot one sanctioned match a year and you are good. And when you're done, whichever method they use, your club's going to report the scores to the IDPA headquarters in Arkansas, and you'll get a notification when they are final and when you have officially been assigned a classification. Easy peasy. And then from there, you can start thinking about shooting sanctioned matches. So if you've got any questions about anything you heard here, send me an email. I would love to hear from you. Contact me at Lloyd, Lloyd, at unloadpodcast.com. If you shoot a classifier recently, or if you shoot one after hearing this podcast, send me a message and let me know how it went. I'd love to hear. Check out the website, unloadpodcast.com, for show notes. I'll have links to a lot of the information that we mentioned here, some videos about how to shoot the classifier, and links to get you started so that you can go and sign up at idpa.com, and information about the rules and about the classifier, all the classification scores. So get out there, find your local IDPA club, shoot a match, and have some fun. Next time, we're going to be discussing equipment and what you need to get started. Join us next week for another episode of Unload and Show Clear.